Welcome to another episode of the LilyList Podcast. In episode 28, we have the pleasure of hosting Rhonda Parker Taylor, a multifaceted individual with a wealth of experience and insights to share. Rhonda takes us on a journey through her life, from a small-town childhood filled with unique community connections to navigating personal and professional challenges. We'll delve into her early experiences, the pivotal moments that shaped her, and the wisdom she's gained along the way. It's an inspiring conversation about empowerment, the need for human connection, and finding your own path to success. As always, visit LilyList.com for more information on the podcast and platform. You can also contact us from the website if you have questions or ideas for people or topics you'd like to see us cover in the future. If you'd like to support the work of LilyList, you can donate using the links in the description, and if you find these conversations meaningful, we thank you for liking, following, sharing, or subscribing wherever you listen. And with that, I will say, Rhonda Parker Taylor, Thank you for joining the LilyList Podcast. I'm glad to have you here. What I'd like to do is, before we get into where you are today and the work you're doing, is step back a bit to childhood and, where were you born and what was your childhood like up to before high school, right? So what was it like growing up, and what were some of the impactful things that happened during that time?
Oh, I'm so glad that you had me here today. And let me tell you, it is so important for us not only to capture our stories and tell them to each other, and that's what we go through this today, but it also helps us open up to each other. And I think that's such an important thing for all of us to be able to capture and tell us not only the ups and downs in our lives, and our successes and failures, but our story of success, which is what you're building with each one of your podcasts, and its resources for everybody out there. So I really appreciate you having me today. I'm from Indiana. I'm from the small town of Noblesville. Now it's not as small as it was when I was born. I'm a little seasoned now. So, when before high school, I would say that, that it was a one light city. Now it's a fairly large metropolitan spread suburban area. And what I loved about that community is you could get out on your bike and you could ride as a child. You could know your neighbors. There was no street lights. And so instead you communicated through a dinner bell that was outside of your family's front door, and they would ring it, and they would ring it for dinner. They would ring it to come in. They would ring it when you had an appointment. You would ring it when the weather was changing. And I can remember one day that was just so beautiful back then. And there were dandelions in the fields and wildflowers. And me and my neighbor, who we actually shared the same birthday, only she was 2 years before me, were out making chains out of flowers. And all of a sudden, we hear the bell ringing and ringing, and it shows just how uncertain life can be sometimes, because they had just announced that there was a tornado heading towards us.
Oh, wow.
And we're looking at them crazy, like, why are you ringing this bell? But then you have these two young girls that have been friends literally all their lives since I was 2 and she was 4, running towards the house with these flower chains that they had built together in friendship. And, all the little sayings that they would say back then, like, do you love me? Do you love me not? Kind of, sayings that you taught little girls, and how that set a foundation for my outlook in life. That pure love for people and community. So I didn't get the privilege of going to the public school there, which I always wanted to, but my family felt like I needed to be in a more structured, conservative environment. So they sent me to a private school, which kind of left me a little uncertain in my social connections, because here I had these connections at home, and then I'd have other connections at school, and it kind of left me vulnerable to trying to figure out how to navigate this complicated for a young child's view of you're involved in one location and then you go home and you're excluded from the group that you normally used to be included from because they have their school activities. And what I found in all of this is it taught me to be social first and have empathy first over academics. So that isn't necessarily the perfect model for a young child, but I chose not to compete at a level of academics. I let my brother do that. He was the smart one. And instead, I put a focus on embracing continuous learning about others. And when doing that, that fostered a growth mindset in a different direction. And many people didn't understand me necessarily. My dad would even say, you're like a damn butterfly that just hops from flower to flower and you never completely focus on one thing. But that also was my charm, and I struggled academically because of it, because I put people first. Yeah, I'd be the one that sit down, be quiet, sit down, be quiet, sit down, be quiet. That could have been like my slogan. You're the girl that needs to sit down and be quiet. And then, life started hitting sometimes, as it always says, you grow and you have challenges. And academically, I didn't grow. I was only just a mediocre person academically. Socially, I thrived. And because of that, I had to put a lot more into finding people to model myself after academically in the later years of my high school life to be able to go to college and do the normal things that people say you're supposed to do, because it didn't look like that's what I was going to be able to do. So I did do that, and I found people to led by example. And because of that, I became a better person. So the people that I had leaned into to socialize with, then I had to lean into to be mentored.
So for you going into high school and then college, do you feel like you had a good sense of self, which you could then apply to understanding others, or were you still finding yourself as you went through that phase?
I don't think I found myself till yesterday.
Okay.
I would have said back then, if you would have asked the younger version of me, did you know yourself? I would have said, of course I did. I did this, I did this, and I did this, and I went here with this person. But really, I was more of a caregiver and taking care of and nurturing those around. And many a times because of that, I put myself into vulnerable situations. I would find the weakest and most vulnerable one out there, and I would pull them into my cocoon nest and try to mentor them and try to pull them together and put them back on the path. And sometimes because I did that, what ended up happening is I wasn't scanning the environment for me. I wasn't scanning, is there any potential harm to me? Is there any potential opportunities for me? So I missed out on some of those cues that would be for self-regard and maybe even self-awareness on the internal and external aspects of my life, because I was so involved in others and making them be successful and making sure they got the pats on the back and they got acknowledged and they had food on the holiday, and I'd cook for a big meal and deliver meals and this. I'd go to, take my puppy and walk some of the worst neighborhoods and find the homeless and give them, because I owned a vending company, was one of my first entrepreneurial adventures. And, before things would expire, I'd go and I'd hand out the goodies and thinking of that, the puppy was going to keep me safe. So the humanistic part of me, I think, was solid. My communications was solid. I had a clear vision that what I wanted to do was be this robust person that saw no negative. And what sometimes happened, I can give you an example, as I was walking, I got a job downtown Indianapolis, and I was walking down the street. I saw this homeless person every single time. And I saw people do a literal U-turn to avoid this person. And I could never understand. I thought, I'm never going to be that person.
Yeah.
And so I went to walk straight past them. I didn't take heed that these people might have had something that they'd seen before or experienced before. I was not going to be that person. So I walked straight past them. The person saw that I was doing that and literally, in their mental state, went to grab my throat.
Mm.
Why didn't I take heed from everybody else? I wasn't scanning my own personal environment. I was more worried about the other person's feelings than my own. So yes, I think that it's taken me years to be completely aware, and I still have to remind myself, because social to me and being kind and being a good leader in that way, I would say is more important and is a priority for me. So sometimes I would rather empower others before I empower myself. And that's not a good complete model of success. So I have to remind myself, prioritize. Make sure you're reflecting on your life. Make sure that you're maintaining a certain amount of safe boundaries and healthy boundaries when you are doing things with others, because any of us could make a mistake, and have what I call false loyalties. Sometimes you're loyal to something that's not going to be loyal to you because you've not taken heed.
Yeah. So to that end, you obviously had a entrepreneurial mindset and, creative mindset with the work that you're doing. But as you came to that end of your sort of teens and into your 20s, you said that you found some people, high school and college, where you could kind of learn from them and kind of grow through them.
Well, first would have been an English teacher in between my junior and senior year. We had to pass an English proficiency test. Her name was Miss Donnelly, and she realized that I wasn't going to pass.
Hmm.
And if you didn't pass, you didn't graduate. So it's not like today's scale where, they have different tracks and this. My IEP was pass or fail, and that was it, And so she tutored me between that junior and senior year. And we sat on the floor in her home, and she helped me of all subjects. With me being a writing professional now, it was English.
Yeah.
And it was something that I realized then that I had to have a model that helped me be successful. It wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was my impatience of spending time in the words, in the techniques, in the practice of doing it to be successful. So she taught me this. And then I went off to college, which I would not have been able to do had I not graduated. So she changed the whole trajectory of my life. Now I have a doctorate. So that would have been the first person. But then when I got into college, I realized the importance of resources. And I'm not just talking about like a dictionary, which is very important that we have a dictionary. We have them on our computers now. You can do anything, right? But I'm also talking like books. Like I read Daniel Goleman's books on emotional intelligence, and I realized, hey, you don't have to be the brightest bulb in the bunch or the sharpest crayon or however you want to put it. You just have to know how to use this and develop your main characteristics for emotional intelligence, which, is important. It's, mainly four scales of intrapersonal, interpersonal skills, stress management, and general mood. And if you can, and there's 21 characteristics that fit underneath all that, but if you can manage your emotions and the emotions of others, you can be successful. Well, that was a theory I'd never heard in my entire life. You either can memorize it and apply it, or or you're not going to be successful. And so this model was a wonderful piece for me, and so I started doing more research. I started doing more papers in school, and guess what? All of a sudden I started getting A's.
Yeah.
I found out I was smarter than I thought I was. And I had to learn to apply the theories, not try to memorize the theories. So this resource of reading and becoming a continuous learner was a large component of me being able to be successful throughout the next periods of my life. That's why I urge any listener, please don't feed into the negative self-talk. Get resources like this podcast, share, listen, and use the tools that people have out there that they're sharing with you. Find the ones that work for you. Daniel Goleman's model was perfect for me because it gave me the self-confidence. It might be something else for somebody else, but when you put those resources and really listen to those few little tidbits, then what ends up happening is that growth just inspires you to be the best version of yourself. And it allows you to focus on not only your mental and your self, but also in the ability to practice self-care. Because you realize you're being too hard on yourself. Instead, take the steps. So there's been several along the way, but I would say those are the main ones, and learning to use those resources.
So during this time of transition for ourselves, when we're actually finding ourselves, understanding ourselves, finding these models and applying them, I mean, there's got to be failure along the way, right? That's generally how we tend to learn is through failure. So for you, is there some, what's a time that stands out before you hit your sort of career time where you just said, man, I really screwed that up?
Well, there have been personal failures where maybe I didn't handle things correctly. Like, I'm divorced now. To step back from, so then there's life failures where life has failed you. I had the murder of my adopted son.
Oh, wow.
I was at the peak of my academic career and a campus director at a college. And the stress of working in that environment with the same age group, he was working as a bouncer at a bar. He was in his 20s. And someone came in and shot and killed him because they had put him out of the bar. So that's a life failure. And so I've had the personal one where, I didn't apply myself correctly. And in a way, I put more focus on my work life than my home life. Then there's the one where life has failed me because somebody else chose to change the trajectory of my life. And then there's the upside of that. When those two things happened, continue together within a few years, when I stepped back, I opened up my consulting company because I felt like that was my survival. And then I had to say, okay, you've stepped in this, you've left your job, you've got to eat, you're on your own. How are you going to do this? And I remembered the words that my father had said one time about him being an entrepreneur and that he had 5 kids and he could not accept any failure or loss because he had 5 mouths to feed. And I dug in deep and I became creative in my entrepreneurial marketing aspects and said, I can be creative. I can make this work. I know there's a market out there. I know people don't know how to navigate this new technology-oriented world. I'm going to help them find their story of success in their careers. And I started with career development first. And then I moved into books, marketing, etc.
That's a great pivot point, because I was just about to ask, is with something like, loss of your son or the sort of dissolution of a marriage, that's those personal things are sort of internal, right? And internal from a network standpoint, not tied to your creative work and not tied to your academia and all that sort of thing. Family is involved, and there's like new norms, right? And there's new ways to move forward if you can move forward. And I was going to ask, from a personal standpoint, who were those people that helped you? You mentioned your father.
Mm-hmm.
Were there other family members or close friends that you really leaned on to kind of build up those structures that helped you through those kind of difficult situations?
There were individuals. The one thing that I always tell my clients that are going through change is just remember your family can be your support, but they can't be your therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I found is I leaned somewhat into them,
Yeah.
but it was more on the surface level. I was a basket case, and many a times they may not have even known it, but I would be driving, and it didn't matter what building was open. And if it said therapist, if it said church, if it said community event, I was pulling in there. I had hands laid on me. I, got on a mat and prayed. I've done every gamut of experience individuals that know what to do when someone's in pain. And I would bawl, I would cry, they would listen. And that's really all I most of the time needed, And I realized, and one of the goodness out of it is one thing that my mother had taught me was the openness of experience. And so by being able to be open to any of those buildings that were open at any given time of the day to get some kind of prayer, meditation, whatever, I gained tools. It could have been there were times that I even went into like an AANA type of an environment where there was no judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Just open and pray and get some kind of somebody that can connect that's gone through something. So for me, it wasn't as much the people that were around me that were my friends and family. It was the people that were also going through things that you could share those rough times and you could share the heartache and you could share what you were trying to do, but maybe you didn't quite get done that day. And then they could hand you a book or they could hand you a pamphlet and they could hand you a hug and they could tuck you back in your car and tell you to come back again next time you need it. And that openness, because, when you go to family sometimes, they have kids, they have to eat, they got to pay their bills, they've got this. That is not necessarily their calling. They're not an expert in grief. They're not an expert in divorce. They're not an expert in, addiction or whatever the issue is that's going in any of the listeners' lives. So by going to the experts and them allowing me to speak my truth, I found that I was healing. It took a long time, but each time I went, the journey got shorter to the heal. I still feel the pain, and that's not the only loss that I've had. I've found that life doesn't spare anybody. It is always going to hit eventually. And my journey is different than the next person. But when you start talking, they're very similar lives. For me, my mother lost her life to breast cancer, September 19th, 2004. My son was shot and killed September 19th, 2009. My uncle passed September 2019, September 19th, and my father was ready to pass on September 19th, 2020. My sister said, because he was on life support, this is the same day as Mom and D'Angelo's. And he said, let them have their day. Do it after midnight. Mm. So he's September 20th, 2020. And what I found is I feel like, and some people would say that would be the worst day in anybody's life from here on out. And it's very difficult. But I feel like that was my higher powers way of helping me deal with it. They're all together. They're all, watching you. They're all supporting you, and they're all still a part of your life. And somebody else, it might be a similar journey, or it might be something totally different. Grief counselors or grief meetings, you find that people have, similar things and then different things. So what I would tell people is your journey, but it's also your journey of success. It's your whole story of success. Those ups and downs and uncertainties are all part of finding the lessons that you're supposed to learn to be the better human.
Taking the opportunities. Yeah, I think that's a good place to pivot. One thing I will say, it's funny you mentioned the dates. So my wife and I got married on June 3rd, 2000. And on June 3rd, 2003, my youngest brother died in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
And people will say, oh, that's so terrible. And I view it as sort of a yin and yang sort of thing, right? So having those two events on the same day really reminds us of how fragile life can be, and to pay attention to the good and the bad as we go forward and be able to work through all of them. So
exactly. And finding that your story is something that you can inspire others with. And that is why this podcast is so enlightening for people. It's kind of like creating the ice castle that gets chiseled every time there's an event. You're creating something. And, your self-awareness and your self-regard, as each time that chisel hits a piece of ice and makes another aspect and artistic ability of your life, also is where you're getting actualized. It's making you the person you're supposed to be, some of the weaknesses, some of the strengths. And then you find out that through all that, you have an accountability to yourself to be happy.
And you mentioned a vending machine company. I know you, of course, you're a successful writer as well, but what, you get out of college and you decide, hey, I want to be entrepreneurial, and what does that path look like for you? What are some of the things you've taken on, some of the things you've succeeded at, and maybe some of the things you've failed at along the way?
Well, the vending machine one is a very good example to start with. So that was my first entrepreneurial adventure, and it could have been very successful. I had a lot of the contacts, etc., but I didn't have the mindset that if it was meant to be, it was up to me, which is something Dad used to always say to us as kids. And so I tried to bring some people in and thought that they would do the maintenance and they would do, this one, and I'd get the contracts. And meanwhile, the vending machines weren't getting filled. And I put this, it's the same mental mindset that I talked about earlier about the social part, where you take on the projects, you're bringing them in, and you try. That's not necessarily the path you're supposed to be on. So it failed. It failed miserably. I did make some money, and I did sell the machines, and got back on track. But it was my first entrepreneurial adventure that I learned the importance of building a good team. A team that has the same mission, a team that's willing to work as hard as you are, a team that's not going to run out the back door with a contract, all of these things. And I realized that I had the entrepreneurial spirit because that's what I'd seen all my life. My father was an entrepreneur. His father was an entrepreneur. My mom's mom and dad owned a cafeteria. So this is what was modeled to me. So the creativity was there, but the discipline and the trusting too much was too much. I had to go back to what my father had taught me, and that is you have to question other people's intentions and know what their strengths and their weaknesses are. So for anybody that's wanting to be an entrepreneur, I would say that it's the most is embrace, first of all, your failures and learn from them. Don't sweep them under the carpet. Realize, okay, there's a reason that this is a down point, and find a solution for it. Then experiment with the different solutions to make sure that you're continually improving it. And when you do that, then you can focus on finding the model and the things that work best for you. Now, today, the wonderful thing is you can use so many different software programs, AI, whatever, and say, well, how would you handle this? And they'll tell you right there. Or there's books and resources. So use those resources to make sure that you're finding the lesson and then work on your skills. Know what you're good at and know what your staff's good at.
Yeah. So that was, I agree with that. So I started a machine learning platform in 2016, which failed in 2019. And I did the same exact thing as you. Was I was able to pay everybody except for me. At some point I couldn't keep up with that. So, but taking those lessons from that, how does it go from vending machine to writer?
Well, I told you that in my learning cycle, writing in English was one of my tough ones. Yeah. So I continued staying in college, first of all. So I have a doctorate and in business, and I kept on smithing myself, and basically working on my skills, learning from others, and got into the academia world. And like I said, my son passed away. And for me, I wanted to write a good novel. I love to read. And I started Crossroads, which is the first suspense novel. And I wanted it to be something that someone could relate to. So I used not only my writing, but then I also used my longing to understand the human psyche. So I used the DSM-5 manual to diagnose every one of my characters. And so every one of them, they have the characteristics that are believable. Instead of being like when you think of suspense, you think of a king or a Kuntz. A lot of times that's more in the fantasy, not grounded in necessary reality. I wanted my characters to be like one that was just next door, or you or me or anybody. And so I did that. And then all of a sudden they kind of took over.
Yeah.
And they had a whole new life, and I wanted to explore their emotions. And I used the emotions of anger, fury, and envy. And Proverbs says anger is cruel, fury is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? Envy makes the bones rot. And then I thought, isn't that perfect for today's society? We're always angry, we're always furious, and we're always envious of the person on social media that has the better life, that we think that has the better life. So I kind of weeded that all in there. And then it sat for a second, and I had a memo that I sent out, and someone said, you realize you used the wrong inshore? And I went back, and sure enough, I typed the wrong inshore, and I was like, okay, now it's got to be a best-selling novel. And so I had to go back, and I had to re-edit and re-looked at everything and did all of that. And I was like, I think it's ready. But then I had to think of I knew nothing about the publishing industry. I knew nothing about, writing a book. So I got this book, and I'm like, now what do I do? So it sat there, and my sister said, why aren't you doing something with it? You had a publisher at one time that was interested. That fell through. So why aren't you still out there? And I said, because I don't know the industry, and I don't know what to do with this. And I don't know what to do with that. And I have this client. She said, that's not it at all. Because if it was somebody else's work, it would be done by now.
Yeah.
And I kind of had to look at my sister like she's not supposed to know anything about me. She's only known me all my life, right? And she was right. It was fear. I was the one holding me back. Just like when I was younger and didn't want to, learn my own learning styles, I didn't want to release it to the world and be, open to it. So I got back on the horse and said, okay, do you want to go the traditional route anymore? Is that an acceptable model for you today at the age you are, which will take about 2-3 years longer? And I'm like, I'll send a few more query letters out again. But let's look at the other options. And self-published, well, you don't get a lot of respect of self-published. You have a hard time getting doors open for you. You see all the pros and cons of self-published. And then do you want to have to figure out for 2 or 3 hours how to put a barcode on it? And then I found the in-between approach, which is a blend between the traditional and the self-published, which is a hybrid approach. You find an expert that helps you in these things that you don't have the knowledge in.
Yeah.
And
another model to help you.
Right. And so that's what had worked all my life. So what worked for me was going with Mindster Media. Mindster Media is a hybrid approach. They're professionals. They have the contacts. They know how to get you in the doors. They knew how to get everything done for me. They knew what I needed to do to improve the manuscript. But at the same time, they let me have complete autonomy of the creative part of it, which I loved. And so I talked to them, and then they said, the one thing that you're missing is you don't have a well-known endorser or somebody that, can write your forward. And I was like, well, I could go back and ask my school teachers and this, or, somebody I work with, a professional that way. He said, no, let's go a little bit bigger. And I'm like, well, who would that be? And she said, I think you should send a query letter to Merrill Hemingway. I'm like, well, I know who Merrill Hemingway is, but why would she care about my book? And they said, well, one is the book is very similar to her life. She was a very high excelling, individual that had unbalanced life. And they said, I think that because of her brand is all about mental health and life balance, she would really love, the idea of the book. So I wrote the letter, and it took about 2 or 3 weeks, and then I got an answer back that she was interested. So we started negotiations then, and she wrote the foreword. She also did a YouTube video called Merrill Hemingway Praises Rhonda Parker Taylor's Crossroads. And in that was the first time, and I highly recommend anybody out there that has a passion for something and wants to take the steps. I'm not saying just the same steps that I did to do my book. It could be any business. It could be, a home that you want to buy. It could be any dream, but find the person and the people and the resources that will help you take those steps. Because there's nothing better than, in my case, hitting the YouTube video to hear it for the first time and getting chills down the spine. Imagine if you're out there listening right now, you are walking into that house for the first time that you've dreamed about having, and you've got the keys and it's yours. Imagine if it's the coffee shop that you always wanted to open, or the records you always wanted to produce. Yes, sometimes it takes sitting down, saving the money, and doing it, because nothing is for free. But once you put the money in the bank and get that coffee shop, get that house, use whatever resources, whatever rewards program to make it happen, and you get it done, the chills down the spine is worth every second. And in my case, I hit that play to hear what someone actually had to say about my work for the first time. And I was the first 1,000 views. I swear I was. I kept on playing it. I kept playing it. And I kept on playing it. And then I had to hit reality. Wait a minute. So do we stop here? Or do we keep on down this journey? And then you realize that life's journey, everything we step, I used to say, put one foot in front of the other, the little cartoon version of walking through your adversities, challenges, and uncertainties. And I was on a podcast the other day, and the guy said, well, in Japan, they say the longest journey is shorter after the first step. And I was like, that's the perfect model for anybody in their dreams. And the rest is history. I'm still, I can't say that I'm a millionaire from it, but I'm better for it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy, and I feel fulfilled and self-actualized for a goal that used to be not even able to be a dream. I was going to flunk.
Yeah.
I was going to flunk.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point to think about. We've touched on a number of topics during this conversation where we understand that there's an end to all of
Mm-hmm.
this. I mean, an ultimate end, right? I mean, there's an end to a book and there's an end to a vending machine business, but there's also an end to us. So when we consider that, where are you at with regard to what do you want to do with the time you have left, and how do you want people to think about you? Who do you want to impact, and how do you want them to think about you when you're gone?
That's something that has been in my mind for probably a year now. Probably longer than that, if I was honest. When you think about it, because I've had losses and I've gone through different ceremonies and wondered. My dad was known as Wild Bill. Everybody loved him. There was a huge crowd, and he was also known as $100 Bill because if anybody was doing a great job, he'd walk by and just give him $100. He had all these things that everybody thought he was charmed. My mom's was a little bit more quiet. My son's was very sorrowful with me and his biological mom mourning and his children. And I've wondered, what would I be known for? What would I want them to know me for? And I've realized, especially, I really want, I was blessed to have this journey with my books, and I want more of them out there. And I want people to realize that every one of my written words, my verbal words, my essence as a human being was intended to be kind, loving, mentoring, because I had mentors, and a person that wanted the world to be better to everybody and equal. So I would hope that, the people that have known me through my life and the people that have watched my journey or heard my story, when they do get that news, that they not necessarily are sorrowful, but they're glad that they knew me. And I don't know how. I've already had a car accident that I should have been dead in. So I don't think that's the way I'm going to go. I'm diabetic. I have a bad heart. I'm getting old. So I'm not really sure what my ending will be. But I know that my intentions will be that I am able to care for others in the end too. And I want to be able to give them that gift. And I don't know how that gift will be, but I want everybody to feel the compassion that I have for them and passion for them as at my ending, because I feel like there's a spiritual connection to that. You don't make a commitment to people, and some are just for seasons, but that commitment is a spiritual connection and a deepening to each other. Even if you don't see that person for another 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, that connection is very purposeful. And that season that you're with them should hopefully be something that even if there was an argument at the end, the essence of the connection was deep enough to overcome that argument. And if it's not, then we need to make it right before that ending. So
I wonder the essence of connection. You talked about models and you talked about the English teacher that had such an impact on you. When I think about that, if I was going to describe it from how you described it to me, which I could be wrong and you could correct me if that's the case, but it makes me think of somebody who's giving, somebody who's committed, somebody who's sharing, who's willing to share knowledge that they have, someone who's loyal, I'm guessing, as long as you're doing the work. So if I think of that as kind of a description of that model that teacher was showing you, are you able to define yourself at this point in your life with regard to what your model is if you were interacting with someone else?
I would say, the thing about that model is it taught me something because, in the end, I had picked up an Arby's job and to pay her. And I asked her how much I owed her. And she said nothing.
Yeah.
And yes, I think it modeled to me complete giving. And I had gone through something in that period that she had not known in my struggles. And when she learned that, she was like, I'm surprised you're even still here. And as a young woman, I'm like, well, what other choice would I have had? And in today's society, we're so judgmental of other people's journey that I would hope that I could model that same compassion that she had for me. She learned my lowest low and was able to come out of that and still make me a success.
Yeah.
And yes, I would hope that would be a model that everybody could remember about me.
Okay, cool. Well, I always end on this. I have a feeling I know what the answer is from you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But we do live in legalistic times. And when we think about others and ensuring that we are taking care of others, part of that is kind of the legalistic aspects of wills and medical proxies and all that. I'm taking a guess that you're probably pretty set with that stuff at this point in your life.
Right. Yeah, I've had two models on that too. Models is my thing. My dad, he was more of a loosey-goosey person.
Yeah.
But he got it done in the end. And my mom was very equal. Everybody's treated equal. And the one thing that I am concerned and have not figured out is in my demise, I have the individuals that I want to bless with belongings or my life and pictures and all of those things. But who or what organization would I also like to bring along on that ride to success? So I am in the exploration of how do I take my model and bring it to helping a broader scale. So the day-to-day, the people around me, yes, that all's done. I know what I want to do there. But as far as a more broad span message, I would like to leave a lesson that others can model or see or hear or benefit from. And I do not know what that would be yet.
Do you capture, do you journal, or I know you write, of course, but do you capture your own stories, your own lessons learned and all of that in some way that can be shared?
My family's, my ancestors, all the way back to the 1500s, yes.
Oh, cool. Great. Oh, that's awesome. That's, as I said,
my genealogy, everything. Yeah. And then I have even a group that on both sides of the family that I've shared everything, all the research that I've done. So yes,
that's awesome.
Yes. So I do have a firm believing that knowledge is everything and people can learn from others' successes and failures.
Yeah. Many of us don't understand how big of a legacy just sharing stories are. A lot of people without financial resources think, well, I can't leave a legacy. And it's like, you've lived a life, you've experienced things, you've learned things. Like that is probably a more important legacy than financial. And that's part of me is to make people understand that it's not difficult to capture those things and leave them behind these days. We just need to make the time and make the effort to do it. Right.
And time is the big part to document one person's life and then, or anybody's life. It does take time, but today technology makes it a whole lot easier too.
Yeah, I find that what's more important though, comprehensiveness is not the most important thing, right? So it's just capturing the meaningful aspects, the lessons learned. And these days we all have these things, phones in front of us. It's like you can talk into them while you're walking somewhere and capture that stuff. But yeah. Well, Rhonda, this was lovely. I sincerely appreciate your time and your open sharing and the insights you provided. but this was wonderful.
And thank you. And everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed it. Help the podcast spread the news about the importance of planning and doing the best that you can in storytelling. And one of these days, you're going to have to play those guitars for us.
Oh, well, I've got a lot of time in my life was spent playing those guitars, so I will gladly send you some links. You may not like the music, but I'll be happy to share it. So,
okay, perfect.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done, and that is salvation. The most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead.